In the long memory of the world, healing began in silence. Before hospitals and written prescriptions, before the language of science or the naming of disease, there was only observation, the quiet attention of human beings to the natural world. People watched the rhythm of rain, the shifting of light across the sky, the slow return of leaves each spring. They listened to the heartbeat of the seasons, the steady breathing of the earth itself. From these patterns, they learned that life moved in circles, not lines, and that every form of balance carried its own kind of health. In those early days, medicine was not a science, it was a rhythm, a way of being close to the world. To heal was to listen, to the air, to the water, to the pulse beneath the skin. Health was not perfection, but harmony, the soft alignment between body and time, breath and place. As centuries unfolded, this quiet wisdom shaped every culture in its own way. Yet at its heart, it always returned to stillness. The moment when the noise of living fades and the deeper pulse of existence can be felt again. Tonight, as you listen, imagine that stillness. Let the movement of your breath slow to the rhythm of the story. Let the sound of history drift through you as the world around you grows quiet. This is where healing begins, not in urgency, but in calm, not in striving, but in the gentle balance of being. And now we begin. Part 1. The Ancient Systems of Medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine. In the valleys of early China, when morning mist still curled between the mountains and rivers moved like silver threads, the first healers began their quiet study of life. They had no laboratories, no microscopes, no words for cells or systems. What they had was time and the patience to watch. They watched the sky, the moon waxing and waning in its slow, predictable rhythm, the shifting light of dawn and dusk, the breathing of the earth through seasons, the warmth of spring, the still heat of summer, the quiet withdrawal of autumn, and the deep rest of winter. They noticed how everything in nature moved between opposites, light and dark, warm and cool, growth and decay, action and rest. From these observations came a way of seeing the world that would guide their understanding of health for thousands of years. They called it the balance of yin and yang. Yin was the quiet side of life, cool, receptive, inward, and still. Yang was the active side, bright, warm, expressive, and outward. Together, they were not enemies, but partners in an endless dance. When yin and yang flowed smoothly, the body thrived. When one expanded too far or diminished too deeply, imbalance appeared, and with it came discomfort, pain, or fatigue. Illness, in this view, was not a punishment or a defect, but a message, a signal that the body's harmony with nature had been disturbed. The healers did not rush to correct it. They listened first. They felt the pulse, not just once, but in several places along the wrist, each pulse a different river of information. Lightly, with fingers trained through years of practice, they sensed rhythm and depth. Was it strong or weak, rapid or slow? Was it floating near the surface or hidden deep within? They looked at the tongue, its color, its coating, its shape. A pale tongue might suggest cold, a crimson one might show heat. A thick coating could mean stagnation, a thin one, depletion. They listened to the voice, the tone, the breath between words. They asked about sleep, dreams, appetite, and emotions. They paid attention to details that modern eyes might miss. How a person entered the room, how they sat, how their eyes moved when speaking. Every gesture, every sound, every silence offered a clue about the movement of qi, the vital energy believed to flow through all living things. Qi was not something to be captured or measured. It was simply the quiet pulse of life itself, the unseen current connecting body, mind, and earth. When qi flowed freely, vitality followed. When blocked or weakened, imbalance appeared. To restore harmony, the healers turned to methods both simple and profound. They used acupuncture, the placement of fine, hair-thin needles into precise points along invisible pathways called meridians. Each point corresponded to an organ, a function, or an aspect of emotion. The insertion was gentle, barely breaking the skin, yet enough to open the body's inner channels. Some points released excess heat or tension, others awakened what had grown sluggish. The intention was never to force the body, but to remind it of its own natural order. Beside acupuncture came moxibustion, the burning of dried mugwort or moxa near the skin to create warmth. The heat seeped inward, nourishing what was cold or dormant. The scent filled the room, soft and earthy. In winter, moxa restored circulation and comfort. In damp climates, it dried the heaviness of moisture trapped inside the body. They also practiced cupping, where small cups made of glass or bamboo were warmed and placed on the skin to draw up tension, to move blood, to encourage flow. Red circles left behind were not marks of harm, but signs of movement, of stagnation being released. Herbal medicine was another art, vast and intricate. Healers studied thousands of plants, roots, and minerals. They understood which herbs cooled and which warmed, which calmed the spirit, and which strengthened the blood. Formulas were built with care. Each ingredient balanced against the others, every property harmonized like instruments in a song. Some herbs acted swiftly, others gently over time. Boiled, steeped, or powdered, they worked not to silence symptoms but to guide the body toward balance. Food, too, was medicine. The color, taste, and temperature of each ingredient mattered. Bitter foods cleared heat. Sweet nourished and soothed, sour gathered and preserved. Pungent dispersed, salty softened. In the cold months, people ate warm grains and slow stews. In summer, fresh greens and cooling fruits. Meals followed the rhythm of nature, not indulgence, but maintenance of harmony. Movement was another medicine. Gentle exercises known as Qigong and Tai Chi taught alignment, breath, and awareness. They were not performed for strength or competition, but for internal balance, the joining of thought and motion. Slow circular movements mirrored the flow of wind through trees, water around stones. Practiced daily, they kept the energy within the body, fluid and calm. Even rest was seen as part of treatment. The healers often prescribed quiet. They understood that the mind's agitation could disturb the body's equilibrium. Stillness allowed the organs to recover, the heart to steady, the breath to deepen. In this way, traditional Chinese medicine was not about fighting illness. It was about returning to the middle, the balanced path where neither excess nor deficiency could take root. To heal was not to conquer, but to listen. Over centuries, these practices grew into a vast system, written in texts, refined through observation, and passed from teacher to student. The most revered of these writings, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, described the body as a microcosm of nature itself. Within its pages, the organs were not machines but living landscapes, the liver like a forest of renewal, the heart like fire bringing warmth, the lungs like metal refining breath, the kidneys like water holding depth, the spleen like earth grounding all. Each organ had a spirit, a temperament, and an emotion. Anger could disturb the liver, sadness could weaken the lungs, fear could cool the kidneys, worry could burden the spleen, joy, when excessive, could scatter the heart. The physicians believed that emotions, like seasons, must come and go. When held too long, they hardened into imbalance. Thus, healing required not only herbs and needles, but awareness, an understanding of how one lived, thought, and felt. They taught moderation in all things. Rise with the sun, sleep with the stars. Work with focus. Rest with peace. Eat what the earth offers in its proper season. Walk often. Breathe slowly. Speak with kindness. These were not just moral teachings, but medicine for the rhythm of being alive. Time passed, dynasties rose and fell, yet the philosophy endured. It survived because it reflected what people could see and feel every day, that the body responds to change, that harmony within mirrors harmony without. The balance is not static, but fluid. When illness appeared, the healer did not see a battlefield. There was no enemy to destroy, only imbalance to calm. The goal was always restoration, to bring the patient back into resonance with the quiet order of the natural world. In the villages, clinics, and temples of ancient China, this art of healing was practiced in silence and respect. The air smelled of herbs drying in the sun, of smoke from burning moxa, of rice and ginger steaming nearby. The healer's tools were simple: a bundle of needles, a handful of leaves, a calm voice, and years of attention. Patients came not only for treatment, but for guidance, how to live more gently within the cycles of life. Some came with fever, others with fatigue, some with sadness that had lingered too long. They were received with patience. Questions were asked softly. Observations were made without judgment. The body was read like a poem, each pulse a line, each symptom a word, together telling the story of imbalance and the way home again. Slowly, over days or weeks, as balance returned, the symptoms eased. Sleep deepened, appetite came back, breath flowed easier. The patient would feel once again part of the world's quiet rhythm, the same rhythm the healers had studied for centuries. To them, wellness was not an achievement, it was simply alignment, the harmony of the individual within the larger movement of the universe. To be well was to flow with the seasons, to rest when night arrived, to wake with the morning, to eat what was grown nearby, to think with clarity, and to act with kindness. Traditional Chinese medicine endures because it teaches something timeless, that health is not a fixed condition, but a relationship between inner and outer worlds, between what we take in and what we release, between stillness and motion. And so across thousands of years, the wisdom continues to breathe quietly. In every cup of tea brewed to soothe the chest, in every deep exhale at sunrise, in every slow stretch of the spine before sleep, it is there, a reminder that the art of healing begins where listening begins. To live in rhythm is to remain well. To move with the world, not against it. To be gentle with change, patient with the body, kind with the heart. This was and still is the way of traditional Chinese medicine. Not a battle, not a cure, but a conversation between the human soul and the silent, enduring balance of the earth. Top of form. Greek and Roman medicine, the four humours. Far to the west, where the sea met the stony shores of the Mediterranean, another way of healing slowly took shape. The light there was clear and steady. Olive trees shimmered in the wind. The air smelled of salt, grain, and crushed herbs. Amid this quiet landscape, early physicians began to study the body with the same patience that farmers gave to the weather or sailors to the tide. They believed that human beings reflected the balance of nature. Within the body flowed four humours, four living fluids that carried health and temperament: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each belonged to one of the four elements: air, water, fire, and earth, and to its own qualities of warmth, moisture, or dryness. Health was harmony among them. When one overflowed or another fell away, balance was lost and illness appeared. To heal was to restore proportion, like tuning a string until it found its proper tone again. This idea formed gradually, shaped by generations of observers. Among them stood Hippocrates, who lived on the island of Kos in the 5th century BCE. His writings became the foundation of Western medicine. He taught that disease did not come from spirits or gods, but from natural causes, from food, air, emotion, and environment. The healer's task, he said, was to look and listen before acting, and above all, to do no harm. To Hippocrates, medicine was an art of attention. He observed how a patient slept, how they breathed, what they ate, and how their skin felt to the touch. He watched the pulse, the color, the tone of voice, the warmth of the hands. From these signs he read the state of inner balance. Each body, he taught, carried its own climate. Some were warm and dry, others cool and moist. A person rich in blood might be generous and lively. One ruled by yellow bile could be quick and passionate. An excess of phlegm brought calm, sometimes bordering on sluggishness. Too much black bile deepened thought and shadowed mood. To heal a person, one had to understand their internal weather. Treatment was gentle, there was no war against nature. The physician guided rather than forced the body's return to equilibrium through rest, diet, baths, and slow adjustment. If blood was heavy, a small letting might lighten it. If cold dominated, warmth was offered through compresses or movement. When the body was burdened, the diet was simplified until clarity returned. Greek medicine placed healing beside philosophy and ethics. The body was not a machine, but a harmony within a larger harmony, a reflection of the same order that governed stars and seasons. To live well was to live in rhythm with nature's logic. Across Greece, spaces of rest and recovery emerged. The Asclepiae. They were sanctuaries rather than hospitals, open courtyards, shaded gardens, stone rooms cooled by wind and water. Patients came for restoration, not haste. They walked beneath olive trees, bathed in clean water, and slept beneath the open sky. Sleep itself was medicine. The healers moved quietly among them, adjusting pillows, murmuring observations, letting calmness do its work. Medicine and environment were inseparable. Hippocrates taught that treatment must consider the season, the winds, the water, and the patient's way of life. A coastal village bred different ailments than a mountain town. To know the body, one must also know the landscape. Health was the balance between person and place. In time, this philosophy spread through the Aegean and into Rome. There, another great physician, Galen of Pergamon, refined it further. Born in the 2nd century CE, he studied anatomy, observed wounded gladiators, and wrote extensively about the humours. He added precision and notes on veins, nerves, and organs, and organized medicine into method. His influence would shape healing for more than 1,000 years. Galen saw the body as a system of interdependent parts. Each organ had its role, each humour its flow. When balance shifted, signs appeared: fever, pallor, fatigue, unrest. The healer read these signs with patience, trusting the body's wisdom. Surgery existed, but only when nature could not mend itself. Most care relied on herbs, baths, and simple food. The aim was always restoration, never conquest. In Roman homes, small gardens held everyday medicines: rosemary for the mind, thyme for the lungs, mint for digestion, lavender for calm. Baths were part of health, not indulgence. Water moved through aqueducts into communal spaces where citizens bathed, stretched, and shared quiet talk. Warm pools soothed muscles, cool baths awakened the blood. Cleansing was not luxury, it was balance made visible. Even on battlefields, Roman physicians worked with calm precision. They cleaned wounds with wine, bound them with cloth, and trusted time. In the noise of war, the same philosophy held: observe, assist, do no more than necessary. Illness, to the Greeks and Romans, was not a punishment. It was a temporary distortion of harmony. The cure was patience, moderation, and alignment with nature. Fresh air, clear water, steady movement, and temperance were valued as highly as medicine itself. Excess, in food, drink, or passion, could unbalance the humors. Restraint preserved vitality. Even joy required moderation. Too much excitement scattered the spirit, just as too much grief weighed it down. Their writings carry the simplicity of quiet wisdom. Let food be thy medicine, and medicine thy food. To nourish was to heal. The healer's first tool was understanding, the second, compassion. A morning visit might unfold gently. The physician entered a sunlit courtyard, greeted the family, felt the patient's pulse, and asked how they had slept. Perhaps he suggested a lighter meal, a walk by the sea, or a warm bath before dusk. Healing unfolded through rhythm, through ordinary acts performed with awareness. In the libraries of Alexandria and Rome, scrolls were copied, studied, and debated. Medicine and philosophy intertwined. To understand the body was to understand the natural order, its balance, its patience, its restraint. Students were taught that observation without humility led to error, and that the healer's presence mattered as much as the remedy. The influence of this ancient vision lasted through the Middle Ages and beyond. For centuries, physicians still spoke of the four humors, still described temperaments as sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, or melancholic. Modern science would later replace the theory, yet the idea of balance remained. Even our language remembers it. We still speak of warm hearts and cool heads, of dry humor and balanced temper. These are traces of a worldview where health was harmony and the self was part of nature's rhythm. Greek and Roman medicine was not primitive. It was observant, measured, and profoundly human. It asked the healer to move slowly to see the person before the illness, to act with moderation, and to honor the balance that sustains life. Imagine, for a moment, the scene. A courtyard, washed in afternoon light, the sea audible beyond the walls. A patient lies on a couch, linen drawn lightly over their chest. A bowl of water reflects the sun. The physician sits nearby, listening to the pattern of breath. There are no machines, no urgency, only patience and care. Healing unfolds at the pace of the body, at the pace of the day. As evening falls over the Mediterranean, lamps are lit and the air cools. The physician writes by hand what he has observed, preparing to return tomorrow. For him, healing is not an event, but a process, a gradual return to harmony. And so, through centuries of study, the Greeks and Romans shaped a vision of medicine rooted in rhythm and restraint. Health was balance. The healer was its guardian, to act gently, to live moderately, and to observe with reverence. These were the foundations of care. The waves that once touched the stones of Kos and Pergamon still reach the shore today. Their rhythm has not changed. The same wind that stirred the olive branches still crosses the sea, carrying the old truth of ancient medicine. that harmony within body, mind, and world is the truest form of health. Top of form, bottom of form. Bottom of form, indigenous medicine. Across the vast forests, deserts, and oceans of the world, healing was carried not in books but in stories. Among the first peoples of many lands, medicine was not a profession, it was life itself. It lived in the way people walked the earth, how they listened to the wind, how they honored the animals and plants that sustained them. Every place had its own rhythm of care. In the deep woodlands of the Americas, in the red soil of Australia, in the green valleys of Africa, and along the great rivers of Asia, healing was learned through observation. Slow, patient, and reverent. Knowledge was not taught in schools, it was inherited through presence. A child watched an elder prepare leaves at dusk or listened to the story of a river that could soothe fever. Over time, these moments became understanding, and understanding became practice. For indigenous healers, the earth itself was the first teacher. They learned from soil and stone, from roots and leaves, from the behavior of animals and the patterns of the sky. Every plant had a purpose. Every scent carried memory. They knew which bark could draw out infection, which flower could calm the mind, which berry could renew strength. Such knowledge was not separated from daily life, it was woven into it, as natural as breathing. The healer was not only a practitioner, they were a guide, one who listened, tended, and remembered. When someone fell ill, it was not seen only as a problem of the body. It was a sign of distance. Distance from the land, from the community, or from oneself. To heal was to restore connection. The remedy was not always medicine in the modern sense. Sometimes it was time near water, where the sound of flowing rivers calmed the heart. Sometimes it was rest under trees, where shade and stillness reminded the spirit of belonging. And sometimes it was the warmth of human company, hands preparing herbs, voices sharing quiet stories, presence given without demand. In their world, healing was circular. It began and ended with balance. To be unwell was to have lost that balance, to have stepped out of harmony with nature, emotion, or spirit. The healer's role was to bring the circle whole again. They burned sage to cleanse the air. They brewed bark and roots for fever and pain. They placed stones warmed by fire along the body to invite circulation. They used songs and gentle drumming to steady the breath. They did not separate body from soul. Both were part of one life, moving together. In many traditions, healing began with story. The healer would sit beside the sick person and listen, not just to words, but to pauses, to tone, to the quiet beneath speech. Stories were medicine because they restored meaning. Through them, the ill remembered who they were and where they belonged. To remember was to begin healing. Silence, too, had power. A healer might sit for hours without speaking, sharing presence rather than instruction. The stillness itself became medicine. It allowed the patient's breath to slow, the mind to settle, and the body to follow. They believed that calm was not separate from cure. It was the first stage of it. In many indigenous cultures, plants were not only used for their chemical properties, they were treated as living teachers. Before gathering them, the healer would speak a few words of gratitude, asking permission from the plant and the land. This act was not ritual for its own sake. It was recognition of relationship, a reminder that taking life to preserve life required respect. When the herbs were prepared, each movement was careful, deliberate, and mindful of the cycle it belonged to. From the Cherokee to the Lakota, from the Maori to the San, from the Amazonian shamans to the Aboriginal elders of Australia, this understanding was universal. Healing required balance, with the land, with others, and within oneself. Health was not measured by the absence of pain, but by the presence of connection. Some healers used smudging, the burning of sacred plants like sage, cedar, sweetgrass, or tobacco. The rising smoke was thought to carry prayers and cleanse the air of heavy energy. Others used baths made of herbs, salt, and earth to draw away illness. These were acts of renewal, physical and symbolic. The air changed, the body responded. Calm returned. In the rainforests of the Amazon, shamans drank the bitter brew of ayahuasca, seeking visions that revealed the roots of suffering. They believed the plants themselves could speak, not with words, but through insight and image. These ceremonies were not escape. They were guidance. Through them, healers learned to see illness not as punishment, but as message. The lesson was always the same: return to balance. Among the First Nations of North America, sweat lodges served a similar purpose. Within the dome of earth and stone, surrounded by steam and heartbeat-like drumming, people released what weighed on them: fear, grief, anger, and fatigue. The heat and darkness were not punishment. They were purification. When they stepped back into the cool air, they felt light, renewed, reconnected. In the desert lands of Australia, the Aboriginal healers, often called Ngangkari, practiced with songs, touch, and the dream time, the spiritual memory of the world. For them, illness was often a sign that part of a person's spirit had wandered away. Healing was the act of calling it home. The healer would hum softly, tracing the air above the body, drawing invisible lines of belonging. When the person's breath deepened, the healer knew that balance had returned. Everywhere, the essence was the same: respect for the living world and for the invisible ties that bind it together. In their view, medicine was not about domination over nature, but cooperation with it. The earth offered what was needed. The healer's task was to listen. Their ceremonies were shaped by rhythm: heartbeat, breath, flame, and drum. The repetition of these sounds brought stillness to the mind and warmth to the body. Each rhythm was a reminder. Life moves in circles, and every circle can be mended. Healing was not something done to the sick person, it was something done with them. The community gathered, hands prepared food. Children fetched water. Songs filled the air. The act of coming together was as important as any treatment. Connection itself was part of the cure. When modern people look back, they often see only the surface, the herbs, the rituals, the chants. But beneath these details was a profound philosophy, that health is a relationship. The human body, the earth, and the unseen spirit were one continuous flow. When any part of that flow was blocked, life suffered. When the flow was restored, peace returned. These ancient healers did not need laboratories to prove what they knew. They saw the results in calm faces, in slower breathing, in the quiet strength that came after rest. Their medicine was not quick, but it was complete. In every act was respect. For the land, for the cycle, for life continuing quietly. When they walked through forests, they left offerings of grain or song. When they drew water, they spoke gratitude. When they treated the sick, they remembered that the same life flowing through the patient also flowed through themselves. For them, healing was not conquest, it was conversation. And in that conversation, balance was always the goal. The modern world, with its hospitals and data, may seem far from these traditions, yet traces of them remain. Smudging ceremonies are held in clinics to honor indigenous patients. Herbal medicines, once dismissed as folklore, are studied again in laboratories. Even the idea of holistic care, treating body, mind, and spirit together, carries their imprint. Their wisdom endures because it was never based on control. It was based on listening. To the wind through trees, to the stillness after rain, to the quiet pulse of life in all things. And in that listening, they found the oldest medicine of all: presence. The willingness to be with another in stillness until harmony returns. That, too, is healing. Top of form, bottom of form. Top of form, ritual and intention in healing. Before there were sterile rooms or bright lights, before the language of medicine became scientific, healing began in stillness. The healer would first prepare a space. It might be a corner of a room, a courtyard, or the shade of a tree. The air would be cleared, sometimes with herbs, sometimes only with silence. A bowl of water might be placed nearby, a reminder of purity. The hands were washed not only to remove dirt, but to signal readiness, a gesture of focus and respect. This was not religion, it was attention. The act of arranging space, of quieting the air and slowing the mind was part of the medicine itself. Every gesture carried purpose, every movement had rhythm. When the healer entered, the space changed. There was no rush, no noise, no sudden motion. Each breath marked the beginning of care. The patient, watching, began to slow as well. Fear softened, tension released. Before any touch, the healing had already begun. The ancients understood that comfort precedes cure. They knew that a calm mind allows the body to respond. Rituals gave shape to this understanding. They were not superstition, they were structure. They offered a way for both healer and patient to step away from chaos, to enter a shared stillness where attention could deepen. The preparation of hands, the lighting of oil or incense, the murmured tone of voice. Each of these gestures carried meaning. They told the patient, "You are safe." They told the body, "It is time to release." The ritual was not about what was done, but about how it was done, with care, with rhythm, with intention. Across ancient worlds, this pattern repeated. In Mesopotamia, healers mixed oils and herbs with quiet prayer. In Egypt, physicians began their work by breathing slowly, aligning their movements with the pulse of the patient. In China, the physician would feel the flow of qi through the wrist, in silence, eyes half closed, until the rhythm of one life touched another. Each culture found its own language for the same truth: that attention is a form of medicine. When the healer's mind was steady, the patient's mind would follow. When intention guided every action, the body recognized care and began to mend. We might call this presence today. The ancients simply called it care. Ritual gave rhythm to healing. It turned fear into calm, disorder into meaning. It marked the difference between chaos and restoration. Within these moments of structure, people found peace. The tools were simple: bowls, cloth, herbs, flame. But the essence was profound, the deliberate slowing of time. Nothing was rushed. Every detail mattered. The healer listened, not only to symptoms but to silence. A pause before a gesture, a breath before touch. These were part of the treatment. They reminded both healer and patient that healing is not something done to the body, but something awakened within it. The earliest forms of medicine were as much about restoring balance to the mind as to the flesh. Ritual was the bridge between the two. It gave comfort shape, it translated intention into form. When a patient entered a space of care, the world outside receded. Inside, only rhythm remained, the sound of breath, the slow movement of hands, the faint hum of air. The ancients understood something that science would later rediscover, that the mind and body are not separate. When one calms, the other follows. When one is honored, the other begins to heal. In villages, temples, and simple homes, rituals framed the experience of illness. They created order where there was uncertainty. A candle burning by the bedside was not only for light, it was a symbol of endurance, a reminder that life still moved quietly within. Some healers sang while they worked. Their voices were low and repetitive, not meant to entertain, but to synchronize breathing, to slow the rhythm of the room. In that cadence, anxiety eased. The song became medicine. Others used touch in silence. The steady weight of a hand on the shoulder, the warmth of palm against skin. No words were needed. The intention within that touch spoke directly to the body's instinct to mend. In some places, movement itself was a ritual. A healer might circle the patient once, then begin treatment, marking boundaries between illness and recovery. Each repetition carried meaning. A reminder that care was deliberate, that the act of healing required preparation of both space and spirit. Even the smallest gestures had purpose. Folding cloth in equal lines, pouring water slowly, whispering a name before beginning. These were not random acts, they were signals, ways of aligning the mind before tending to life. Today we might call it mindfulness, but long before the word existed, people understood it instinctively. Healing required presence. It required awareness. And awareness, when consistent, became ritual. In this way, ritual was medicine's earliest discipline. It demanded focus, it demanded patience. It trained both healer and patient to meet each moment fully. The same principle lives quietly in modern care. The washing of hands, the laying out of instruments, the steady tone of the doctor's voice. These are descendants of the ancient rituals. Even surrounded by machines, the pattern remains the same. Prepare, pause, proceed with intention. Ritual also gave shape to fear. Illness often brings uncertainty, a sense of being lost. Structure brings direction. When the healer follows a sequence, the patient knows that something ordered is happening, that life is still held within a frame. This trust itself can ease pain. It reminds the body that it is not alone. Throughout time, the details changed. Flames became lamps, oils became medicine. Songs became quiet words of reassurance. But the essence of the ritual never vanished. It remained. The deliberate slowing of movement, the thoughtful act of beginning with stillness. In every age, there has been a moment before the first touch, a pause where intention gathers. That pause is the oldest medicine. It is the breath that steadies both healer and patient. It is the point where care begins. The ancients may not have known the chemistry of healing, but they understood its rhythm. They knew that every recovery begins in safety and that safety begins with attention, a clean space, a calm tone, a gesture performed with presence. These were their instruments. Their science was silence. In that silence, fear became manageable. Pain softened. The mind, sensing order, began to rest. The body, sensing rest, began to heal. Even now, centuries later, every act of care carries traces of these beginnings. A nurse folding a blanket, a surgeon adjusting gloves before incision, a therapist lighting a candle in a quiet room, all are echoes of the same truth: intention heals. The ancients did not separate the practical from the symbolic. Both mattered. The act of cleaning was both hygiene and preparation. The gesture of lighting a flame was both ritual and reminder. Symbol and science were one continuum, both serving the same purpose: to restore balance. And when balance returned, healing followed. Ritual did not cure every illness, but it always created the condition for healing to begin. It offered comfort before remedy, peace before treatment, trust before touch. It made space for life to mend itself. This is the quiet legacy of the world's earliest healers. That intention, when paired with presence, is medicine in itself. And though centuries have passed, that truth remains. Every time a healer pauses before acting, every time a patient takes a breath before speaking, the ritual continues. Softly, invisibly, a rhythm as old as care itself. Bottom of form. Top of form, bottom of form, early surgery. In time, courage shaped new hands of healing. What began as observation slowly became action. Across the ancient world, healers learned that sometimes, to preserve life, they must open the body itself. It was a quiet revolution, and not born of haste, but of necessity and care. Long before modern hospitals, surgeons worked by lamplight, guided by touch and memory. They had no anesthesia, no sterile rooms, no machines to steady their hands. Only patience, courage, and the will to understand. Every incision carried risk, yet within that risk grew knowledge. In India, more than 2,000 years ago, the physician Sushruta gathered what he had learned into a vast text, the Sushruta Samhita. It described over 300 surgical procedures and more than 100 types of instruments. There were scalpels and forceps, hooks and needles shaped from iron and stone, each crafted with care. Sushruta taught his students to study anatomy not through guesswork, but through dissection, to understand structure before attempting repair. He insisted that precision was not merely technical, it was moral. To cut without knowledge was to harm. To cut with understanding was to serve. He recorded methods for setting broken bones, draining abscesses, removing tumors, and even reconstructing noses, the earliest form of plastic surgery. He wrote of preparing the patient with clean surroundings, calm words, and herbal washes. The operation began only when both healer and patient were ready in mind and body. When the work was done, he instructed that wounds be covered with cloth soaked in honey and oil, nature's antiseptics long before their chemistry was known. Rest followed, and time, always time, to let the body weave itself back together. Far to the west along the Nile, Egyptian healers practiced their own art. Papyri found in tombs describe techniques for stitching, bandaging, and treating fractures. They knew how to align broken limbs with splints made of wood and linen, how to drain fluid from swelling, how to close wounds with fine thread. They used bronze knives and bone saws, sometimes heated to cauterize, sealing blood and sealing fear. Their work was both practical and methodical, carried out in calm, controlled steps. They recorded their cases carefully, noting the signs of life returning or fading. They understood that even survival left marks, and that every healed scar was a teacher. Archaeologists have found evidence of their skill. Skulls once opened, then healed, the bone grown smooth again. Patients who lived not just hours, but years after their surgeries. These quiet survivors became the living proof of progress, long before progress had a name. Across the ocean, in the highlands of ancient Peru, healers performed one of the oldest and most daring procedures known: trepanation, the opening of the skull. Some say it was to relieve pressure after injury, others to release pain or spirit disturbance. Whatever the cause, the result speaks for itself. Hundreds of skulls have been discovered, many showing clear signs of bone regeneration, meaning the patients survived. The tools were simple: sharp stones, steady hands, and unbroken concentration. Perhaps coca leaves dulled the pain, perhaps fermented maize drink soothed the mind. But above all, it was focus that guided them, not speed, not force, only precision and presence. In these early surgeries, death was a constant shadow. Yet so was hope. Every life saved taught the next generation what was possible. Step by step, technique replaced superstition, and skill replaced fear. The healer became more than a caretaker, they became a craftsman of life itself. In Greece and Rome, this knowledge evolved again. By the 1st century, surgical practice had become an accepted art. The physician Galen, whose writings shaped medicine for more than a millennium, learned much from observing gladiators, men who suffered every possible wound the body could endure. Through them, he studied anatomy, the pathways of nerves and blood. He practiced on animals, careful and curious, seeking to understand how motion and sensation connected. His writings detailed methods of stopping bleeding with clamps and cautery, of repairing tendons, of removing foreign objects lodged within. Roman surgeons carried these arts onto the battlefield. There, amidst dust and noise, they worked quickly but calmly. They cut away torn tissue, cleaned wounds with wine, and stitched with linen thread. They bound limbs with splints, burned small vessels to stop bleeding, and gave water mixed with herbs to ease pain. They worked not in silence but with focus, an island of concentration in the chaos of war. Their success was measured not in miracles but in survival. Many lived because these healers refused to turn away. Though their knowledge was limited, their courage was immense. To open a living body without knowing what lay inside required trust, in skill, in experience, and in the resilience of life itself. Mistakes were lessons. Each failure became part of the long memory of medicine, shaping the care of those yet to come. Instruments improved slowly. Blades grew sharper, handles steadier. Bronze gave way to iron, iron to steel. But the principle remained unchanged. Before the cut, stillness. During the cut, control. After the cut, patience. Every motion had purpose. Every tool was an extension of thought. Surgeons learned to read the body like a map. They knew the pulse of arteries, the color of healthy flesh, the scent of infection. They could tell when life was leaving and when it might return. Their workspace was small: a table, a lamp, a basin of water. Yet within that space they navigated the borders of pain and survival. Without anesthesia, the mind became part of the operation. Assistants held the patient steady. Voices soothed, herbs dulled sensation as best they could. Some patients drifted inward, breathing through the pain, their strength a silent partnership with the healer. When the work ended, there was quiet, a stillness shared between exhaustion and relief. The healer washed their hands again, cleaned the tools, and stepped away, leaving the rest to time and to the body's own wisdom. In each civilization, surgery followed the same rhythm: preparation, action, rest. The tools differed, the languages changed, but the core remained: knowledge, focus, compassion. Even without modern science, these healers understood structure, sequence, and stillness. They knew that to cut was not to harm, but to release, to remove what trapped, to restore what could still function. In some regions, surgery blended with ritual. The act of cutting carried solemnity, as though both patient and healer crossed a boundary together. The precision required demanded reverence. To open the body was to witness life directly, its fragility and strength interwoven. This awareness gave rise to humility. The surgeon's craft was never casual. Each operation was a dialogue with the unknown. As centuries passed, techniques traveled through trade routes and manuscripts. From India to Persia, from Egypt to Greece, from Rome to the far edges of empire, knowledge flowed quietly. Tools were copied, adapted, refined. By the Middle Ages, the work of Sushruta and Galen was still studied, their insights carried into Arabic and Latin texts, their principles echoed in the halls of early universities. Even as time changed the instruments, the patience of the hands remained the same. In the stillness of their work, these early surgeons laid the foundations for everything to come. Modern surgery, with its lights and precision machines, traces its ancestry to their courage. Their discipline, their willingness to act where others hesitated, shaped the evolution of healing. They showed that knowledge grows through risk, and that the line between pain and recovery is drawn by attention, not by chance. Picture one of them now, a healer in a quiet stone room, the air thick with oil and smoke. A lamp glows beside a low table. A patient lies still, surrounded by helpers. The surgeon's hands move slowly, eyes steady, breath measured. Each movement is deliberate, each pause intentional. When the task is done, the wound is bound, the tools cleaned, the lamp lowered. Outside, the wind moves over the land, carrying forward the quiet courage of those who healed before science could name what they did. Their legacy lives in every modern hand that holds a scalpel, in every steady movement guided by care. The principle remains: first, do no harm. Second, do what must be done. The rest belongs to time and to the body's quiet wisdom. From the river valleys of India to the deserts of Egypt, from the mountains of Peru to the camps of Rome, the art of surgery evolved through patience and precision. No grand discoveries, no sudden leaps, only generations of quiet observation, steady hands, and the belief that healing, though difficult, was worth the risk. What they built endures. Their courage became our inheritance, their discipline our method. Every clean incision, every restored life, every modern operation carries within it the same intention that guided them: to relieve suffering, to restore function, to honor life. And though centuries have passed, the rhythm is unchanged. The tools hum, the lights shine, yet beneath the sound of machines, the silence of focus remains. The same silence that once filled the rooms of Sushruta, the workshops of Egypt, the tents of Roman healers. That silence is where healing begins. And in that silence, the hands of the surgeon, ancient or modern, move with the same purpose. Not to conquer the body, but to help it find its way back to wholeness. Legacy in modern medicine. The centuries turned, empires rose and fell. The instruments of healing changed shape, yet the rhythm of care remained. What began in temples and clay houses now moved into laboratories, hospitals, and digital screens. But beneath all this progress, the same breath continued, the ancient pulse of healing, slow and steady. Science grew like a patient tree, its branches spread into anatomy, chemistry, and biology. Its roots remained in observation and empathy. The microscope replaced the naked eye, but the gaze was still the same, to see clearly, to understand what life needed in order to mend. Machines could now measure what the ancients had only sensed: the pulse of blood, the rhythm of breath, the quiet power of calm. Wires and monitors translated life into numbers. Still, behind every reading stood a person, breathing, waiting, hoping. Medicine evolved, yet its essence did not, the union of knowledge and compassion. In hospitals, the air smelled of sterilization and time. Lights glowed white, hands were gloved, metal tools gleamed where once there had been stone and bronze. But when a doctor entered the room, paused, and spoke softly, that pause was older than any science. It was the same moment of attention that ancient healers had known, the moment before touch, the breath before care. Through centuries of discovery, the oldest truths quietly endured. We learned again that peace of mind strengthens the body, that a steady breath lowers pain, that kindness itself can influence recovery. These were not new revelations, they were returns. Modern research, with all its instruments, began to confirm what was already known in silence thousands of years before. In the 20th and 21st centuries, medicine rediscovered what the ancients practiced without formula: the connection between body and thought. Stress, once considered invisible, was measured. Relaxation, once seen as luxury, became therapy. The body responded not only to drugs, but to words, light, touch, and time. Science called it the mind-body link. The ancients had called it harmony. Old practices found new language. Yoga, once a path of spiritual balance, became a study in posture, breath, and longevity. Meditation, once a quiet ritual, entered hospitals as mindfulness, breathwork, movement, and stillness. Ancient tools dressed in modern terms: forest walks, herbal studies, sound therapy, acupuncture, all returned not as superstition, but as science of calm. The circle of healing widened again. Technology no longer denied the human spirit. It began to measure it. Heart rate, brain waves, muscle tone, all changed with emotion. Machines recorded the quiet truth. Peace heals. Even in intensive care, the gentle voice, the soft hand, the moment of presence mattered. Every act of care was a reminder that behind the systems and charts, healing remained human. Hospitals began to design space differently. Light grew warmer. Gardens returned to courtyards. Music entered waiting rooms. Touch became recognized not as sentiment, but as therapy. The world slowly remembered that recovery begins not with noise, but with calm. Doctors and nurses, pressed by time, still found moments for presence. They spoke quietly to patients who could not answer. They held hands, even through gloves. They waited in silence when words were too heavy. These gestures, small and unrecorded, carried the same power that once moved through herbal smoke and whispered chant. They were continuations of the same ancient rhythm: attention as medicine. In research centers, new fields emerged: psychosomatic medicine, integrative care, holistic therapy. Each asked the same old question in new form: what happens when mind and body work together? The answers pointed back to the wisdom of balance. Nutrition, sleep, movement, and emotion, all interlaced. Science traced their pathways through hormones, nerves, and cells. But the meaning was simple. To heal is to harmonize. Technology brought clarity, but also distance. Screens stood between people. Data filled the silence that once held listening. Yet even in this, the heartbeat of care persisted. Machines could measure the pulse, but only humans could comfort. Algorithms could predict outcomes, but only compassion could change experience. The heart of healing remained a human rhythm, one breath meeting another. In modern classrooms, students of medicine still hear echoes of the past. First, do no harm. They learn anatomy and pharmacology, but they also learn tone, how to speak, how to wait, how to see the person beyond the illness. When they wash their hands before entering a room, the gesture connects them to centuries of healers who did the same for the same reason: respect for life. Even the most advanced operating rooms carry traces of ancient knowledge. The sterile field is not so different from the ritual circle of old, a space marked for safety, intention, and focus. Every action within it is mindful, deliberate. The surgeon's breath, the nurse's rhythm, the patient's trust, all form a quiet choreography. In the center, the pulse of life continues, steady and ancient. Around the world, the revival of natural medicine grows alongside science. Herbs once used by midwives are now studied by chemists. Plants once dried in sunlight are now extracted in laboratories. What was called folk wisdom becomes evidence-based practice. The cycle completes itself, nature and science reunited. The modern doctor may hold a stethoscope instead of a wooden stick, may type notes into glass screens instead of clay tablets, yet their purpose remains unchanged: to listen. To notice what the body says beneath its symptoms. To remember that healing is not only about curing disease, but restoring balance between organs, between thoughts, between the individual and the world that holds them. Hospitals now blend old and new, acupuncture beside anesthesia, herbal support with modern drugs, meditation rooms within clinics. The union of ancient and modern does not erase difference, it deepens understanding. It reminds us that healing is both art and science, both intention and precision. Technology has changed the method, but not the meaning. Every scan, every surgery, every quiet conversation by a bedside belongs to the same lineage of care. It is the continuation of Sushruta's patience, Egypt's steadiness, Greece's observation, Rome's discipline. The tools have evolved, but the heart remains unchanged. Modern research often returns to ancient insights. Sleep heals, breath steadies, light lifts mood, movement restores circulation. Community strengthens resilience. All these truths were known long before they were measured. Science names them now, but they have always been part of the body's story. Healing, in any century, is still about harmony. Not only the balance of cells and organs, but the balance of life itself, between rest and effort, solitude and connection, reason and faith in the body's wisdom. When harmony returns, health follows. The role of medicine then and now is to guide that return, to create the conditions in which the body can remember what it was made to do. To mend without force, to restore without control, to accompany rather than to command. The healer's duty remains what it always was, to stand beside life, not above it. As evening falls on the modern world, a quiet parallel forms between past and present. Somewhere, a doctor checks a monitor's light. Somewhere else, an old woman brews a pot of herbal tea. Both, in their own way, are tending to the same principle: care through attention, peace through balance. From forest to hospital, from cave to clinic, from whispered prayer to clinical study, healing continues its gentle evolution. The heart of it never changes. It listens, it waits, it trusts the body's wisdom. Technology can map the brain, measure every molecule, simulate every organ. But it cannot replace compassion, nor the steady pulse of presence that soothes pain before medicine arrives. That pulse, ancient, human, enduring, still guides the art of healing. And so, across time, the circle closes. What began with herbs and hands, smoke and silence, continues in circuits and screens. Yet beneath it all, the essence remains unchanged. Healing begins in harmony, grows through attention, and completes itself in peace. The heartbeat of care has never stopped. It moves through every era, every method, every hand that chooses to help. It is older than any science, deeper than any invention. It is the quiet continuity of life healing life. The same rhythm that began in the first small firelight of medicine, still burning now, steady and human. Top of form, bottom of form. Part 2. Sappho, the voice of quiet beauty. Introduction to Sappho. On an island in the Aegean Sea, shaped by wind and time, there lived a poet named Sappho. Her home was Lesbos, a place of light hills, olive trees, and waves that carried song. The air there was soft with salt and sound, filled with the rhythm of oars and the distant hum of lyres. Evenings came slowly, and in those hours between sea and sky, she wrote. She lived more than 2,000 years ago, in the 6th century, before our calendar began. Few details remain of her life, only fragments carried by memory and discovery. Yet her presence feels near, as though her voice still drifts through the wind that passes her island. She spoke in the Aeolic dialect of Greek, a language now long gone from daily use, but still echoing in her verses, delicate and spare. Her words were small in size, yet immense in quiet. They did not describe the battles of kings or the rise of empires. They turned instead toward the heart, to longing, affection, and the fragile pulse of human connection. She wrote of what she saw, what she felt, and what quietly passed between people. Her poetry was clear as morning light, without ornament, without noise. Sappho sang with a lyre resting against her knees. The strings accompanied her voice, soft and deliberate. Each note rose like breath, joined with words that balanced emotion and restraint. She was both poet and musician, her art inseparable from rhythm. To her listeners, poetry was not read, it was lived, a sound that entered the air and lingered. She led a small circle of women, students, and companions. Together, they studied language, song, and ceremony. In the calm of her home, they practiced the ancient art of expression, the shaping of feeling into sound. Their gatherings were not for fame or record. They were moments of reflection, shared between friends and the sea. The poems that survived hint at these scenes: laughter in shaded courtyards, footsteps across stone, the hush before evening. Her life passed quietly, but her influence did not fade. Through centuries of silence and loss, her fragments remained. A single line on papyrus, a phrase quoted by scholars, a verse half preserved in dust. From these pieces her voice returns, faint but unbroken. She wrote not for eternity, but for presence. Each poem a small moment captured, a breath held between heartbeats. And because of that honesty, her words outlived the marble of her time. While empires vanished and languages shifted, her tone remained unchanged, tender, measured, alive. Sappho's poetry reminds us that the human heart has always spoken in the same rhythm. Its needs are simple: to love, to lose, to remember. And in her verses, these needs found their first enduring echo. Even now, when her island sleeps beneath moonlight, the wind that moves across Lesbos still carries her breath, a voice of gentleness, precision, and quiet truth. Top of form, bottom of form, life and setting. Top of form. Sappho lived on an island where the air smelled of salt and flowering time. Lesbos was small but full of sound. Cicadas sang in the heat. Waves murmured below stone terraces. The days moved slowly, measured by the rhythm of work and the changing light. Evenings arrived with music, the soft vibration of strings, the quiet blend of voices rising from courtyards. In this gentle world, Sappho taught women to sing and write. They gathered around her, students and companions, learning the craft of expression. Together they shaped songs about daily life, about friendship, longing, laughter, and the still moments between. They wrote not for audiences, but for understanding. Their lessons were part conversation, part reflection, often held beneath olive trees or beside the calm sea. Her house overlooked gardens where herbs and flowers grew in careful order. There were jasmine vines, wild roses, and the scent of burning oil lamps at dusk. Inside, woven mats softened the floor, scrolls lay on shelves, a small lyre rested near the window. Everything existed in quiet balance. The living space, the teaching, the music. Life and art were never separate. Each supported the other as breath supports voice. Sappho's world moved at a pace shaped by seasons, not by clocks. Time was kept by the color of light, the call of birds, the tilt of shadows on walls. Morning brought warmth. Evening brought cool air and the sound of song returning from the harbor. Within this rhythm, she found her subject. The movement of emotion through ordinary hours. Her poetry was intimate, almost private. It opened small windows into simple moments, a glance exchanged, a letter written, a memory returning with scent or sound. Her focus was not grandeur, but clarity. Where others sang of gods and wars, she sang of the heart, how it stirs, how it quiets, how it remembers. In her circle, every woman was both student and muse. They wrote to one another, for one another, giving feeling shape through verse. They shared food, stories, laughter, and silence. When a poem was finished, it was sung aloud, not performed, but offered. Voices rose softly, accompanied by the lyre's slow rhythm, filling the air with something gentle and lasting. Nights were lit by oil lamps, their flames small and steady. Music drifted through open windows, mingling with the scent of sea air. Sometimes, outside the city, torches flickered in the dark, and distant drums echoed across water. Within this calm, Sappho's words found form. Tender, deliberate, full of space for breath. She lived close to nature, close to friendship, close to the sound of her own heart. Her poetry grew from these surroundings, not as escape, but as reflection. Each poem carried the stillness of her island, its wind, its light, its silence. And so her life became her art, a slow unfolding of words and days, each one touched by the quiet rhythm of the lyre, each one lit by the flame of a lamp that still burns in memory. Top of form, bottom of form, her poetry and themes. Sappho wrote in a voice close to whisper. She chose the first person, speaking simply, without distance. Her words were not meant to impress or persuade. They were a record of perception, of affection, of beauty, of memory held lightly in thought. Each line carried the ease of breath, a sound that began inside and flowed outward. Her poetry was shaped by presence rather than by story. She wrote of laughter shared between friends, of hands touching in passing, of faces remembered after silence. The rhythm was slow and natural, following the body's own pulse. Her words were gentle, balanced like the motion of water across stone. In her verses, emotion was never displayed as drama. It appeared quietly in the curve of a phrase, in the spacing of words. Longing was described not as pain, but as movement, the tremor that lives between absence and remembrance. Love was the warmth of light against skin, or the stillness that lingers when another voice fades. Sappho used language the way a musician uses air. Every syllable mattered. The sound of a word, the pause that followed, the repetition of tone, all were chosen with care. Her poems were built for rhythm, not spectacle. They were meant to be sung softly to the lyre, carried on wind, not confined to page. When she described beauty, it was never distant. It was the turn of a head, the color of dawn, the hush of the sea before night. Her world was composed of small observations, brought into focus through attention. There was no need for exaggeration. The act of noticing was itself a form of reverence. Many of her surviving lines are fragments, yet each feels complete. Even a single sentence holds an entire atmosphere, a memory, a pause, a breath suspended. They remind us that meaning does not depend on fullness. Sometimes the space between words carries the deepest sound. In Sappho's work, emotion becomes clarity. Joy, sadness, and desire are not opposites, but threads of the same fabric. Her poetry accepts them all with equal grace, giving each its own quiet weight. To read her is to listen to still water. Nothing forced, nothing hidden. The tenderness in her voice comes from simplicity. She does not ask why the heart feels, she only observes that it does. She does not seek to fix emotion, only to hold it long enough to be seen. Her lines move without resistance, the way light settles through air. For Sappho, writing was not performance, it was continuation, a way to keep human connection alive through sound. Every poem was a small act of balance, between voice and silence, between presence and loss. That balance remains her gift, the tenderness of existing preserved in rhythm. And so her poetry endures not because it declares, but because it listens. It invites the heart to slow, to feel without question, and to rest in the quiet truth that emotion, when spoken softly, becomes peace. Top of form, bottom of form, loss and rediscovery. Time moves, quietly, and with it, much is forgotten. Sappho's words once filled 9 volumes, songs written for gatherings for friends, for evenings beside the sea. One by one, those pages disappeared. Fire took some. Moisture and decay claimed others. Many were simply lost to the silence of neglect. Her voice, once clear as the wind on Lesbos, grew faint, scattered into memory. For centuries, her poems lived only in fragments, quoted by scholars for grammar, not for feeling. A single line in a dusty manuscript, a phrase used as an example of language, not of life. The rest was silence, long, unbroken, patient. Her name remained, but her music was gone. Even so, the memory of her lingered quiet and persistent, like a note held beyond hearing. Then slowly across generations, the earth began to return her voice. In the sands of Egypt, buried beneath centuries of wind, fragments of papyrus emerged. They were fragile, thin as dried leaves. On them were faint traces of ink, a few words, sometimes only half a line. Yet those faded letters still carried her breath. The fragments were lifted carefully, preserved under glass, studied in silence. Each one a small recovery, a moment of listening across time. Some pieces arrived through chance. A scrap of papyrus found in a forgotten tomb. A scroll fragment discovered among discarded writings in an ancient rubbish heap. Each recovery was quiet, without ceremony. And yet each one brought her closer, as if the world itself remembered and chose to speak again. Even broken, her voice endured. The missing words did not weaken the feeling, they deepened it. Where a line ends abruptly, imagination begins. Where silence falls, presence grows. The fragments breathe in the spaces between, inviting the listener to complete them. They are like echoes across centuries, incomplete but alive. The scholars who pieced them together worked slowly, tracing letters, filling gaps, hearing rhythm through absence. In laboratories and libraries under soft light, they rebuilt what time had scattered. Each recovered word was a pulse of life returning, not restoration, but remembrance. As more fragments appeared, one found on a mummy wrapping, another hidden within layers of reused papyrus, her image sharpened just slightly. Enough to glimpse her tone, her tenderness, her clarity. The sound of a voice that once drifted across moonlit courtyards began to hum again, softly within the modern world. Today, her poems survive not as monuments but as whispers. They arrive in pieces, but each piece holds a whole emotion. The rhythm of thought, the movement of feeling, the stillness of understanding. Her words continue to travel through time, unchanged in their quietness, untouched in their grace. Loss could not erase her. Silence could not contain her. From dust and ash, her voice returned. Faint, fragile, but present. It reminds us that what is meant to be remembered finds its way back. That even in ruin, beauty endures, and that sometimes the smallest fragment can carry the entire soul of a song. Legacy and closing. Sappho's name continues to drift through language and art. It appears in books, in music, in quiet conversations about poetry. Sometimes it is spoken softly, sometimes only written in the margin, yet always with a trace of recognition. The echo of a voice that once sang by the sea. Her influence is not carried by monuments or grand stories. It lives in the tone of her simplicity, in the calm of her words. She is remembered not for power or conquest, but for stillness within expression. For the way she allowed feeling to exist without demand, for the way her poems rested gently within silence. Across centuries, her lines have shaped the language of tenderness. Artists have painted her image, musicians have borrowed her rhythm, writers have followed the clarity of her form. In each translation, in every retelling, her essence remains the same. Measured, balanced, and deeply human. Her poetry reminds us that beauty does not need permanence. It need only appear, be seen, and be felt. A single line, a single breath can hold the same depth as a lifetime. What vanishes does not truly end. It becomes part of what continues. The shared quiet between all who listen. Through her, we remember that art and healing are related. Her words do not mend the body, yet they ease the heart. They slow the mind, they open space for gentleness. In this way, her legacy joins the same long story of healing. That has flowed through every age, a reminder that calm, awareness, and beauty restore something within us that medicine cannot touch. Her name moves softly through time, carried in the rhythm of languages that came long after hers. The word lyric still holds her presence. The music of language shaped for feeling. And in the quiet corners of libraries on pale fragments of papyrus, her verses still whisper their slow truth that to notice, to breathe, to love quietly is enough. As her voice fades into the distance, the story settles into silence once more. There is no ending, only rest. The sea around Lesbos continues its slow rhythm. The same tide that once carried her song still moves tonight. It touches shore, withdraws and returns. Endless, patient, familiar. You may listen to that rhythm now. The sound of her words has become the sound of your own breath. Each inhale recalls the calm she knew. Each exhale releases the day. The world grows still. The air softens. There is nothing left to do. Sappho's legacy is not in the survival of her poems, but in the quiet they create. It is a space for reflection, a pause within time. Here, beauty is not held, it is simply allowed to pass through. And in the calm that follows, you may rest, you may breathe, you may sleep. End of script. From ancient medicine to ancient poetry, the world once moved at the pace of breath. People studied the body, the sky, and the heart, always searching for balance. That search continues quietly, through science, through art, through every act of care. As you rest, imagine those early healers and poets. Their hands, their words, their calm. The same heartbeat runs through time, steady, familiar, human. Sleep comes easily in the presence of such continuity. The story of healing and the story of feeling are one and the same. Both remind us that in stillness, life continues its gentle rhythm. Bottom of form, bottom of form.